Hey guys, this is Verneer for CardRunners.com, and I'm going to be doing a leak finder for a 5NL 6 Max rush session. So we're going to pick it up right here on table 2 with this Queen 10 offsuit. We've got a limper, and so we have a limper from second position, and the small blind completes, and we are in the big blind with Queen 10 offsuit. I don't mind raising this preflop. Not a lot, but more often than not, the initial limper is going to be weak, and the small blind is just going to be completing with a wide range. So with a hand like Queen 10 offsuit, where you have high cards, you are going to be doing much better off playing a single raised pot, or not a single raised pot, but just a heads up pot, even out of position. So by raising here, the most likely scenario is the limper is going to call and the small blind is going to then just fold out. So and then you can take it down on a wide variety of flops. So we do end up limping, and now the hero fires with top pair and a reasonable kicker, which is a very good play. The turn is a queen, so with the one call, I don't think the queen changes all that much. So I would continue betting here. It's difficult to put the villain on a range. He could have a queen himself. He could have a jack. He could have a 5. There's so many draws he can have. I would just bet, 20 cents again here. So I like the bet. I think anything that he might have had on the flop, he might continue with on the turn, unless he had just absolute garbage like an ace-6 and just wanted to peel a card. So he's thinking about it, so he probably doesn't have garbage. Let me just go back really quickly to this hand that happened. So he's doing a lot of folding. The hero is with reasonably okay hands, like Queen 10 offsuit, small blind, big blind. That should not be an automatic muck. So same thing here. We have 9-4 suited on the button. The hero should be raising a wide range of hands from steal positions. So reasonable hands from the small blind should be stolen if everybody folds around. And same thing here. Whenever you have the button, you've got 2 suited cards. There's no reason to not take a shot at them if everybody folds around to you. So we take down the Queen 10 offsuit. Easy fold on table 1. This Jack 8 offsuit, again, not a very good hand, but if it's folded around to you and you're in the small blind, it's profitable to be stealing. So one thing I notice right now is the hero is, he's just passing on some reasonable opportunities to play some cheap pots and try to steal. Pocket 2 is definitely a good raise from any position in a 6 max game. Ace 3 offsuit, we will want to be... So here we're in a position where we have a limper, not a very good hand, but I don't mind isolating to steal. Definitely not looking to play a big pot, but if I can raise it, there's a good chance I'm going to pick up 1 to 2.5 big blinds, maybe even more. If the cutoff continues here, then I'm gonna have position. It's mostly gonna be heads up. I'm gonna have initiative. A lot of very good things can happen. None of them related to necessarily the strength of my hand here. So I would like to pick up with this King 4 suited hand in the big blind. It's going to be folded around to the small blind. And he is going to be raising. Quick note, this King 10 or King 2 offsuit hand on the button, again, it's good enough to raise on the button, especially in Zoom or Rush, where a lot of people, if they're in the blinds and they don't like it, they just auto fold, especially if we have a tight person. And so on table 2, we've got a pretty tight person on the button playing 13-12. I mean, we really should be raising, any 2 cards there. Conversely, on table 1, when it's folded around to the small blind, he's going to end up raising. And I don't think we should be auto folding here. I think King 4 suited is definitely good enough to defend blind on blind. We can either 3-bet or we can call. In this case, versus someone who is pretty much full stacked, I would prefer 3-betting this. So when people are just stealing, most of the time they're just looking to, just get a cheap uncontested pot, and a lot of good things can happen when we show aggression there. The other thing that I see the villain doing is just doing a lot of very quick clicking. So I'd prefer some of the more marginal hands. I mean, especially if you're on the button or the small blind or the cutoff, instead of looking at the hand and quickly clicking it, to take a look at the players that are still left to act and treat it more situationally. So, for example, if there are some tight players behind you, or I should say, ahead of you, still left to act, then you should focus on that much more than on your actual hand. So, Ace King offsuit in the small blind. We're going to be raising it, and we face a re-raise, and a pretty substantial re-raise here too. This is a spot where I am definitely looking to play this fast. I think the best bet here is to make it like 105, 110, and just look to play it for stacks. On one trend that I've noticed is people will flat 4-bets, and Ace King offsuit is not a great hand to have out of position when somebody flats a 4-bet. So I guess given that, I would prefer a bigger 4-bet. So here we face the villain put in around 40 cents. So maybe like $1.10 would be reasonable. And on the table on the right side, the villain raised. There's a min raise from the cutoff. If it's both players fold, I'm okay calling with the jack, queen jack suited, for a couple of reasons. I think 3-betting, this is a hand that I don't mind seeing a flop with, and by calling, I'm keeping a lot of his weaker dominated hands, weaker queens, weaker jacks, etc., weaker flush draws. And by 3-betting, I might be able to, take the pot down right now. But if he continues, he's going to, more often than not, continue with a stronger range. So that's how I would play both of those hands. Call here, and so it looks like the hero is debating calling with the Ace King offsuit. I think that would be a mistake. And here we flop good, and we're just going to check call. All right, so he raised to $1. I think that's reasonable. I might have gone a little bit bigger, like I said, $1.05, $1.10. So we continue just check calling with queen. He makes it 15 cents. I don't mind putting in a small raise here. to like 35 cents. A couple good things can happen. One, we can charge for a draw, and two, we could get value from a weaker hand, and more than likely we're going to be able to get a reasonable showdown. So I'm curious what he had, but I mean, it seems kind of donkish to check raise that turn. The thing is, when we do so, a turn check raise definitely represents like a monster, a very strong hand. So when we do so, we kind of over-represent our hand and are able to get values from draws. And if the villain happens to have a strong hand, we might be able to get a cheaper showdown. All right, so the villain called here. Like I mentioned, it's one of the things that happens is, people end up calling for bets, especially in position. So here we miss, depending on what he has. If he has a pair, he's going to be going with it. If he has high cards like we did, like an ace queen, an ace jack, king jack, etc., then we might be able to take the pot by betting here. On this 8-2-3 flop with a flush draw, it's a relatively dry flop, but I want to discuss the merits of a bigger bet size and a smaller bet size, and whether we should even be continuation betting, and if we do continuation bet, how we should proceed facing a shove by the villain. So with a bigger bet size, let's say we bet 140 into 192 with effective stack sizes of $4. When we do that, we need to, so it's kind of a semi-bluff when we bet there, and we need it to be successful at least 42% of the time. That is our risk equation there. Now, if the villain shoves, then the pot size is going to be 732, and it's going to be 262 call. Well, the pot size is going to be 992. And we need to have 26% equity with the bigger bet size. So if I take a look at the player, and let's say I'm going to give him 8s through queens, so they have an overpair, or they have an overpair to the board, or top set, then we have 26% equity pretty much exactly. So even if the villain has an overpair to the board, then we're in pretty good shape. Now, obviously, if the villain has kings or aces, then we're in pretty bad shape. But overall, this is a pretty good setup for us, where as long as we take it down at least 42% of the time, we are immediately profitable, and then it's fairly break even if the villain shoves and has an overpair. Now, obviously this is like worst case scenario almost. Let's take a look at the smaller bet size. So let's say we bet $1 into 192. Then we need to take it down 34% of the time to show an immediate profit. So as long as we're taking it down a third of the time, we are showing a profit. And if the villain shoves, then it's going to be $3 for us to call, and then we need around 30% equity. Now, we can have 30% equity even, so let's say if the villain has like an ace queen, I'm not sure why he would, shove king queen, but let's say he just shoves that as a bluff. If we just add a couple non-pair hands, then our equity jumps immediately. So, well, in this case, we've got the blockage with the ace and the king. But bottom line is, even kind of in the worst case scenario when he has an overpair, we're going to be doing pretty well. So, given all that, I would say there's more benefits to betting bigger than there are betting smaller, because by doing so, we price ourselves in. So, after some analysis, let's take a look at what happens in this situation. What the villain did, or what the hero did. I actually didn't see I did not look ahead and saw, but he does make a continuation bet, which is good. And so here he bets right between kind of our betting low and betting high situation. But in either way, I hope that if he gets shoved on, he does end up calling. On the right side, it's kind of a dream situation where we're on the button with aces and we face a raise from a looks like kind of a looser player. Definitely want to be 3-betting here. Not necessarily big. 45 might be too big. I probably would have gone 40. There's no reason to 3x here. So we're betting 125 into 192 on the left side. And the villain calls. Kind of awkward here. He calls. Now it's 275 into 431. Let's actually do some math again on this. So let's look at the turn play here. So in this spot we have, there's 431 in the pot. We have 275 left. And if we bet, if we're going to be betting, I think just given the stack sizes, a shove makes the most sense. And if we shove, we need the villain to, we need him to fold at least 39% of the time for that shove to be profitable. So just given the way we got to where we are right now, where we 4-bet pre-flop, then continuation bet a very dry flop, I'm not sure if the villain is going to. Basically, I don't know how much fold equity we have, and it looks like I don't think we have at least 39%. I don't think the villain's going to be folding at least 39% of the time. So if the villain calls, let's say we shove, how much equity do we need? So we're risking 275 to win essentially close to a $10 pot. So we need to have 28% equity. Now, if we give him the range that we, kind of our worst case scenario range, that 10's a very bad card for us. So our equity drops dramatically versus his range of calling pre-flop and then calling on that flop. So at this point, we would expect them to, if he has like an ace-queen or a king-queen, I would expect him to fold on the flop. But even if he doesn't, then, well, if he has ace-king or ace-queen, then we're in pretty good shape. But if he has a pair, then we're in really bad shape. So at this point, I would check. I would not fire again on the turn, just given the way the hand went down and kind of given these calculations. All right, so we are back. We are going to take a look at this ace-king hand. And at the same time, we've got aces going on the other table. So he checks, which I like, given the analysis we did. And so the villain now shoves, and I do think we have to fold. I think we're in pretty bad shape. I don't like the instant fold. I don't like going to the fold button so quickly, but I do think that's the right play. Unfortunate, but that happens. And if the villain, floated us pre-flop and then floated us on that flop and then decided to just shove the turn, and then he outplayed us. But I do think we made the right play there. All right, so ace king again, raising it from under the gun. Let's see what happens, and probably after this hand, I'll just skip ahead to a kind of a more interesting hand. The Jack 10 suited, I definitely like defending here. And on this flop, I just like a check call. on the table on the right. On the table on the left here, with the 8-9 queen, not a great flop. It's actually a pretty bad flop for our ace king. So if the villain checks, I like just checking behind with the ace king. I don't see a lot of merit in continuation betting. So on the right side, we end up betting on the turn, and I like that, and we end up taking it down. We pick up pocket sixes on the table on the left and face a raise. I definitely like flatting here. There's 3-betting would just be gross. Flatting encourages people to, first of all, you keep the pot small, and this is the kind of pot that you do want to play with a small pocket pair. You make sure that you're in position. You don't waste your positional advantage, and you encourage other people to come along. So in that situation, it works out really well since another person comes along and we do flop middle set in position. So the villain bets 20 cents into 50. Now there's two options. We can flat or we could raise. He bet relatively small here. He's only betting 40% of the pot, which is very small. So yes, there's draws on the board. There's a flush draw, there's a straight draw, but I think there's more merit to just flatting here. Yeah, it's a drivey board, but we don't expect a lot of people to have 7-9. There is a flush draw, but I mean, we have redraws. I just think a lot of good things can happen if we flat here. Among which, if one of the two people has, Techno Monkey can just end up raising, thinking that we're both weak, and then we're in pretty good shape. Or one of them can, let's see, Techno Monkey comes along with just some kind of overcards, and one of them catches an overcard, and now that, we're just giving them reverse implied odds. So I like flatting here. So the hero flats, which is great, and there it is, perfect. So now we're facing a raise and a call, and now I would come over the top. At this point, I don't want to flat anymore, because now we're in a position where we want to squeeze more money out. Because let's say we flat and the turn is a blank. The original raiser is going to check, and then if we check again, and then Techno Monkey can check back, like there's just so many bad things that can happen now if we flat. So I like to go ahead and re-raise, just make it seem more spazzy. There's 210 in the pot. Make it something like, I don't mind making it like $2 total, or just something to where they both can't flat. I'd go bigger. So he bet 150, and we end up getting one fold. And all right, so we might have a set over set situation here. Nope. And let's hope for a redraw. Perfect. So that ended up working really well. I like flatting the initial bet, and I like 3-betting once Techno Monkey raised and Evan Ginny ended up calling. So these sixes ended up being a hand that was played very, very well. So one theme in this video that's coming out is El Saepo ends up playing pretty well post-flop, but pre-flop, one leak that I see is he is not raising enough. I'm just gonna say he. I mean, it could be a he or she, but just for the sake of the video, I'm just gonna say he. And for example, Ace 3 offsuit on the button, I see him passing on that, just folding it, and I think that's leaving a lot of value out there. So, for example, there's 7 cents in the blinds. If he raises to 15 cents, he needs the steal to be successful around 68% of the time, which more often than not it won't be. So raising to 15 cents doesn't make a lot of sense. But if we end up even min raising, then we only need to be successful 41% of the time. So that's a much better risk reward for us. And even if we're called, then we're in position. There's just a lot of good things that can happen. So I definitely would like to see El Saepo open it up from the button, much more so. From the button and from the cutoff and from the small blind, a little bit less so, but definitely be raising on the button. So I'm skipping a lot of these hands, but it's important to look at these numbers and look at the risk reward situations and understand that this and a lot of other even weaker hands are just a clear raise on the button, especially in the Zoom games. So for this next hand, we have 6-7 suited in the big blind. And we face a raise from a relatively tight player and a pretty quick call from the player in the cutoff. And we've got the 6-7 suited in the big blind. And I think this is a fine spot to call. You're getting a discount. You are going to see the flop with a hand that plays. It doesn't play great out of position, but I mean, it's certainly good enough to see a flop. And this is a okay flop for us. We have a open ender, although we've got the bad end of the straight and a pair. So the original raiser checks and the player in the cutoff bets 25 cents into 45 cents. I don't see a lot of merit in raising here. I think you can just get yourself in a lot of trouble. So I think check calling here is the best option. I don't think folding is the right thing to do either. Even though, like, if a 6 comes, then we're not going to be in a good situation. So the turn comes a 4. I don't think leading here is really all that bad. I think you can lead, and if you get raised, you can obviously fold. But if you lead, it does one of two things. One, if the player's on a draw, on the turn, if you just check to him, he might check again. He might check back. But if you lead and he's on a draw, he might call. And more often than not, people are gonna let you. You can set your own price. So if you bet like 55 cents, or I think 55 cents would be good here by leading. But more often than not, you can get a cheap river. So we check, and he checks, and the river is an 8. So I think the best play here is, more often than not, is just to check call. Now, El Saepo leads, so I'm not sure what he is. I'm not sure what the point of leading is. If Kashandra had a draw, he's not going to call. If he had an 8 or a 9, he probably is going to call. So we're just going to value own ourselves. And if he had a bluff, he's just going to fold. So it's in a situation where I don't think a worse hand is going to call, but I think because by check calling, we do represent like an 8 or a 9. So I just don't see any value in calling here. I do see some value in checking and getting a bluff to call, or if he has some kind of a weird pair, he might check back. Like he might check back a 9 here. So yeah, overall, I don't see any value in betting here, but I do see some value in checking, assuming that we check the turn. So he probably just had a draw, and yeah, I mean, we're certainly not bluffing him off a better hand here. So let's take a look at these jacks. We raise. If the small blind re-raises, then I would play this for stacks. So here, I'd bet like 20 cents. I wouldn't bet too big. It's just unlikely to hit anything, and obviously, I'm very happy with this hand on this kind of a flop. On table 2, we have ace-2 suited. It's folded around to the button. 18-15 type player who min raises. We flat in the small blind. I don't mind 3-betting this pre-flop just to take initiative in the hand. It's unlikely that with this kind of a hand that we're gonna like if we had ace jack offsuit, then I think flatting is okay because we're keeping a lot of his worst aces in. But with ace 2 suited, it's not like, you know, we're gonna let a lot of it's not like we're letting a lot of dominated hands in. I mean, we've got the worst ace. We might let some dominated flush draws in, but I think overall 3-betting from the small blind here is gonna have more value than flatting. But we flop pretty well. When he bets here, I like just check calling. I think by check raising, we really don't represent much. We represent pretty much what we have, like a flush draw or like, you know, pocket fours, I guess is it. Pocket kings, it's unlikely that we have. Pocket jacks, we're unlikely that we have. So by check raising, we represent just a very narrow range, but by check calling, we represent a much wider range, like a king X, a jack X, and maybe even like a set of pocket fours. Obviously, a lot of flush draws as well. So I do like check calling here. The turn comes a king. We can do one of a couple things here. It's not a card that I would expect the villain to barrel much if he has nothing, because it helps our range a lot more than his c-betting range. So I'll say that again. It helps our check calling range much better than it does his c-betting range. So in this spot, I think leading is okay just because I expect him to be checking back a lot. With the king coming, you know, it could help our we could have trips, we could have a flush, we could have a lot of things. So even if he has something like pocket aces, then I just don't expect him to be barreling that again. So he bets again, and he bets, you know, quite big. So I think check raising here is fine. Although at this point, we really are representing a very strong hand. We are representing like a flush. I think like trip kings is the lowest, is the weakest hand we're representing. So we're representing a very strong range here. So he flats, and the river is a relatively innocuous 6. And we're just going to lead for value. So I like a bigger bet, something I guess on the level of $2, just because if he has a weaker flush, he'll call. If he has a king, he'll call. If he has a full house, he's going to raise us. I don't expect him to raise us with anything weaker than a full house. Like if he has a queen high flush, I don't expect him to be raising. So if we get raised on that river, it's really gross, and we're unlikely to have the best hand. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but you know, even with the nut flush, if we get raised here, especially by an 18-15 type of player, we're doing pretty bad. So he shoves. From my experience, a shove here is a slow played monster, like a full house. So El Sapo calls pretty quickly, and we see the pocket jacks for the full house. So, like I said, as gross as it sounds, I think that river is a bet fold and not a bet call. I'm not just being results oriented. I mean, that's just from my experience. That's been the case where someone flats our check raise on the turn like that, we lead big on the river, and they shove on a paired board. We're just in trouble. So at the same time as the ace-2 suited hand was going on, we have this pocket 6 in his hand on the table on the left. So we raise pocket 6s, get a call from the small blind. We flop top set, which is wonderful. And I would expect us to bet this nicely. I I do think we should bet that flop. And the reason I think I should bet that flop is we're going to the villain's going to be check raising us with a very wide range. So let's say check raising or check calling, I meant to say. So let's say the villain has pocket sevens or pocket fives or pocket eights, any kind of pocket pair. So most of the time they're going to either to check call or sometimes they're going to check raise. But what if a queen or king or jack or ace comes on the turn? There's so many cards that can hurt our action where we could get a couple of streets of value from like a pocket sevens or a pocket eights or a pocket nine types hand, but now we lost it. So you could bet for value. You can bet for the villain to spaz out. In position on that board, I definitely think we should be betting. If the board was like 6-7 queen or something, I think checking back might be okay. But with the top set on that board, I think it's a mandatory bet. So he bets on the turn, and now we're raising. And I think we should raise here, but it just sets up a weird dynamic where we check back the flop, and now we're raising the turn. So, yeah, I think this one should be played just more straightforward. Bet the flop, go from there. Table 2, we're in a situation where we pick up Jack 10 suited and face a raise from the cutoff. I think this is a good spot to defend and call. I don't think there's a lot of merit in 3-betting in this situation versus a cutoff raiser, but from the big blind, I think it's a fine spot to call. So the flop comes 4-6-9, and I actually think this is a good spot to do one of a couple of things. I think leading here is fine. So notice we have a backdoor straight draw and a backdoor flush draw, plus 2 overcards. So there's a lot of turn equity we can pick up. And people are still not very good at responding to leads when they are the pre-flop raiser. So if you lead here and he raises you, well, I mean, there's a couple of things you can do, but more often than not, people are just going to play relatively honest and just fold here. Kind of a more tricky-ish play is to float out of position. So if the villain c-bets, then you can check call, and then you can lead some turns. You can represent a lot of different things this way. Or you can check call, and if the turn gives you additional equity, you can check raise, and that way you can represent a set. So there's a lot of good things that you can do in this situation. You know, you can check call essentially with not much equity, but with a plan to play the turn aggressively. You can lead here. I don't like check raising. I think check folding is fine, but I think in this hand, given the way the board is and what our hand is, and we expect the villain to be c-betting, I don't think check folding is the best play here. I like a mix of leading or check calling, and then either leading the turn or check raising the turn, or yeah, I mean there's just a lot of different options. But I think in general I like leading this kind of flop with this kind of a hand the best. A couple things really quickly. So one, on table 1, we've got a min raise from the button. We have ace 10 offsuit in the big blind. That's a mandatory. That's at least a mandatory call, if not a 3-bet. I think in this situation, I like calling here much better, just because we get to play against many more dominated 10s and dominated aces. So I think this is at least a mandatory call. Here on table 2, that's the main hand that I want to focus on. But basically, this Al Saepo, he's not stealing enough, and he is folding too many hands to steals. So I think that's the major aspect of his game that I think is a leak. Now on table 2, that's the main hand I wanted to talk about. We have a raise from under the gun, and we're in the cutoff with Jack 9 suited. This is a spot where I think playing this is okay, but if you're going to play it, I think you should play it as a 3-bet instead of a call, because the villain's opening range has many stronger jacks and probably not many stronger 9s other than maybe like pocket 9s, but by calling here, we're inviting a squeeze, and we're just going to be playing against dominating. We're going to be dominating against higher flush draws, against higher straight draws, against higher jacks. It's not a hand, even though we're in position, that's going to be profitable by just flatting. So this is a spot where I think you should be either 3-betting or folding. That said, the villain does end up flatting, and you can't hope for a better flop. We flop the nuts. So he leads here. I think flatting is fine. I think flatting is very reasonable. I don't mind raising sometimes in this situation, but in general, I think I would need a special dynamic to raise, where basically by raising, we look like we're, full of it. So it underrepresents the strength of our hand. Flatting is fine since we're in position. And by flatting, if he has just a hand like ace queen, we're just giving him an opportunity to catch up, maybe pick up a flush draw on the turn, maybe pick up some additional equity. If he has a jack or an overpair, if he has a jack, we're going to be playing a bigger pot anyhow. On the turn, once he checks, I think there's reasons for betting. We got to build a pot at some point. If we check, we look like we have a hand like a 9, 8s, pocket 7s, pocket 10s, or whatever. But the bottom line is, if we call the flop and we check the turn, and then he fires the river and we raise the river, which we should, then it looks like we have a very, very strong hand. But if we bet the turn and he check calls or check raises, basically a lot of very good things can happen if we bet the turn. So I think we should bet the turn. So on the table on the left, very similar situation, except now it's from a looser player opening from under the gun. I think so. This time, our hero ended up folding, but I guess I would like to know, why he chose to call the table on the right and why he chose to fold on the table on the left. I would be concerned about, not consistency for the sake of consistency, but I would want to know the reasons. What made those two situations different? So the table on the right, the villain checks, and obviously we have to bet because we have the nuts. We bet a little bit less than half pot, which I think is fine, and the villain folds. So it looks like he had nothing, or he had a draw. So one thing that I'm noticing here is this hero in position with very strong hands is not betting some of the flops and some of the turns, and just letting villains, if they're drawing, if the villain is on a draw, you're going to get your value on the flop or on the turn. You're not going to get it on the river because they're not drawing anymore, right? They either hit or they missed. So even when we have a very strong hand, but it's a possibility that the villain could be drawing, we should be betting flops and we should be betting turns. Table 2, we pick up ace-jack offsuit, and we get called by the player on the button, and two other players are going to end up folding. And the flop is definitely a flop where we should continuation bet. We've got some equity plus against a player's pre-flop calling range, which is often going to be like suited connector heavy and low pair, mid pair heavy. This is going to be a good board to bet. The turn is a queen, and I actually think that we should double barrel here. I think if we check, we set ourselves up for um, having to check call because I still think we're going to have the best hand frequently because the villain can have like an ace 10 or a jack 9 or a jack 10. So we could have the best draw. So if we can have the best hand, and even if the villain has, like a single king, then we've got reasonable equity. We don't have that. Well, we've got like 14% equity. But in general, I don't like giving up on this just yet. So by betting, it's pretty easy for us to, fold if he raises, or if we get to the river, we're just going to be check folding. So I think betting is going to be profitable enough here. We could certainly keep representing a king. We could certainly keep representing a queen on this in this situation. So I think that's our best play. Now, on the table on the left, we have Queen Jack offsuit against a player who raises the button. Pretty active player, but we don't have a lot of hands on him just yet. I think flatting here is okay. It keeps a lot of his dominated hands in, and it's a hand that's going to flop well. 2 high cards connected. We flop trips, and actually it's such a dry board. I like a small check raise in this situation, just because we don't represent anything. So especially against aggressive players, they're just not going to be folding anything. And more often than not, the turn is going to go check, check if we check call the flop. So by check calling the flop, we let a villain get to the river pretty cheaply in a spot where if he has like 9s or 10s, he's not going to be folding this flop, and we can get multiple streets of value just because we look like we're full of it. So I like check raising here. Now that we check called, and the other thing is, see, now that we check call, if we check raise this turn, we just scream like we have a queen. But if we check call the flop, or if we check raise the flop, we look like we're full of it. And then if we bet the turn again, it looks like we're just continuing with a bluff. So check raising the flop actually looks weaker to most players than if we were to check call the flop. Here on table 2, I definitely like defending this queen 10 suited against a button open. So that's good. And let's see what happens on the table on the left. Table 2, I would have check called this flop. Obviously, now that the villain checks, I'm going to lead it. And on the river, see, I think I would check again on this river, because if we lead this river, it looks like if we had pocket 7s, it's reasonable for us to check call this flop. But it's also reasonable for us to then check the river, because we're not going to lead pocket 7s. But if we had a queen, we would check, and we check on the flop, and the ace comes, then we might want to lead and have him call, hope the ace hits him. So basically what I'm saying is, well, first of all, by check calling the flop, we give our hand away in a lot of cases. But given that we did, with the ace comes on the river, I would check again and let him try to represent the ace. And then I could check raise or check call. I would probably check raise. But by leading into him, we just lose a lot of value. So I don't like it. I think that we should have, given the way we played the hand, I think we should check that river again. So, all right. Let me take a quick look at what happened with this King 7 hand. I missed it, so I would like to see how we got ourselves in this situation. All right, so we just completed, and I think that's, oh no, so he raised. So I like that. We raised from the small blind. we take initiative in the hand, and now we could just bet a wide range of flops. If we were just in the big blind, and that way it takes the big blind out of the picture. If we were just in the big blind and the small blind folded, I would have checked. If we had this hand in the big blind and the small blind completed, then I like raising. I think it's similar to the situation we had early on in the video, where this is a hand, if I'm going to be out of position, I would like to go heads up with, and I would like to have the initiative with. So let's keep the pot small. Let's bet 20 cents here and go from there. Table 2, we've got ace-jack offsuit, and I'm going to talk mostly about the combination of post-flop play with pre-flop play. So I think 3-betting here is fine. This is a hand where it's going to play better, I think, against a 1912 player who, from middle position, maybe we don't expect him to be opening a lot of worse aces, maybe like an ace-10 suited, maybe some suited aces. I think 3-betting here is fine. But we're 3-betting with the intention of playing, just firing a couple barrels on post flop if he ends up calling. So the flop comes 2-4-7. I don't expect to have a lot of fold equity post flop here by betting, but betting does a couple of good. The main thing betting does here is it does set us up for firing turns and rivers as a bluff if we miss. So by 3-betting this pre-flop, I can't just try to... my plan cannot just be to try to, make the better hand. So if we would have bet the flop and the turn comes, obviously we're betting again. And now we're really putting the villain to a decision. But I think by checking the flop, if we 3-bet pre-flop, by checking this flop, we're just letting him get away with things for cheaply. So he folds pretty quickly, but I still think betting that flop and then betting again on the turn would be a better play in the long run. Table 2, we actually have two hands going on, one on table 1 and one on table 2. So let me pause it really quickly. Table 2, we've got this raise from Igor, and we're on the button with ace-queen offsuit. I think this is a pretty good spot to call to keep their weaker aces and weaker queens in. I expect the villain to be folding weaker aces to a lot of 3-bets. So yeah, we keep a dominated range and we're in position. So it's a pretty standard spot to flat. I don't mind a 3-bet, but I think flatting is better than 3-betting here. And then pocket nines, we're going to end up raising on table 1. We'll go through each of these. We'll do both hands at the same time and just kind of discuss what happens. So we flop top pair, top kicker, and we had this one player overcall the 3-bet from the small blind. So I'm guessing they might have had a hand like 10s or jacks or maybe pocket 9s, or they're really still playing a monster. So we end up betting that flop, and both players call fairly quickly. On table 1, we get 3-bet by a player on the button. We don't have a lot of hands against him, but looks like he's only played one of them so far. So it's a pretty standard call here, just given the stack sizes. If we're playing for 100 big blinds, there's times in which I might fold in this situation against a very tight player, but given the stack sizes, I think our only play is calling. And for the most part, we're going to be playing this hand very cautiously post-flop. So looking to, so when another villain overcalls, it's a trivial call. Now, the villain leads, the first player leads here. Against the lead, I'm just folding because he could very well be leading here with like 10s or jacks or queens. So we really don't beat much. And the original raiser is still left to act. So this is a spot where I would sit out, observe the action, but definitely fold. I'm kind of trapped between two players against, and yeah, so very good. This is exactly what I would do. I would sit out, I would watch the action, and yeah, I think we played this perfectly, and it's very reasonable for the person that led to have a hand like jacks or queens or even pocket tens. Table 1, we pick up king jack offsuit, raise from middle position, and we end up calling. So reasonable flop. We've got top pair with pretty good kicker, I guess third kicker, and we face a continuation bet from a player. We end up calling here, and the turn brings us 6, so pretty much a blank. Now we have some options, but I do like checking again. I think checking again has the most value, and I would still check call here. It's very reasonable that the villain can have a hand like nines or tens or jacks or queens and just be betting to get value from worse. So I am certainly not ready to fold top pair third kicker here. If you're going to be folding on this turn, then you really don't need to be playing this pre-flop. So this is a spot where I'm definitely check calling the turn. If the river's a blank, I'm check folding against this player, but there's just so many worse hands that he can still be betting that I really dislike the fold here. Ace-10 suited on table 1. We raise from middle position and get 2 callers. On this flop, I definitely like continuation betting. A couple good things can happen. So one, we've got the backdoor spades, which is, I guess that's the main reason I like betting this is because of the backdoor spades. And obviously just the board texture of, queen 8 to relatively dry board. So we have a plan on firing turns. So we can fire any spade, any ace, any 10. The other reason for betting here is it's a multi-way pot. So by betting into 2 people, we come across as stronger than if we were just betting heads up. Just because it takes a stronger hand to fire multi-range or multi-way than against the heads up player. So by betting, if Ekshan flats, then we're going to put him on some kind of a one pair type hand, and we can push him off a lot of hands on the turn. So basically, just a lot of good things can happen if we bet, and it's a spot where we bet we can pick up equity on the turn. So we've got 2 hands that are over cards to second pair on the board. Additionally, we can pick up any jack, any king. Gives us a gutter plus another barrel hand, plus another barrel card. So lots of barrel cards, lots of equity we can pick up, and just the fact that we're betting into 2 people means our hand is pretty strong. So I like betting this. I don't like the insta check. I notice that the hero is just giving up on too many hands post flop, where a little bit of seeing kind of the board for what it is and seeing the situation for more than just how hard did I hit it. He will pick up additional value by just by thinking about hands on kind of the next level, like how is my action perceived by the villains. So instead we end up checking, and the player in position bets, and we fold pretty quickly. So last 2 hands, there's actually going to be 2 hands kind of happening concurrently. that I think are interesting enough to discuss. And it looks like the time in the video is coming to an end, so we'll make these the last two hands. I don't know how these two hands ended up, so that should be fun as well. I just saw the beginning of them, and I saw that they were interesting enough to discuss. So here on table 2, we face a 3-bet from the small blind to our cutoff open. We've got pocket kings. This is a spot where I often like to just flat because my hand is so strong. I think if we 4-bet, it's going to be difficult for the player to it's going to be difficult for this player to flat a 4-bet out of position. I mean, some do, and it's certainly been kind of on an uptrend, that action has been. But I think by flatting, we go to the flop against a weaker range. If the villain has a hand like aces, obviously all the money's going in. If he has a hand like ace king, which is just more unlikely just because we've got the 2 blockers. So in general, I like flatting here. I think if we 4-bet, it forces too many hands out. But against the right player, certainly 4-betting here is fine. Ace 10 suited, we ended up flatting against from the small blind, which I think it's okay if it's a smaller raise size. I think folding here is fine as well. I like leading this flop. Check raising it is okay, but this is a flop that I like to lead. The villain bets, calling. So yeah, this has been a theme in the video of check calling too many spots out of position. On this turn, you definitely have to lead this turn. If the villain's just going to be checking back with just a very wide range of hands. Like if the villain has red aces or red kings or red queens, he's going to be checking back here. So lead the turn, get some value. On this flop, on the right side, we're definitely going to be betting it. And if the villain shoves, it's relatively gross, mostly because, like, best case scenario, we find ourselves up against queens. He could have jacks, he could have tens. Both of those situations are pretty gross. He could certainly still have aces. He might shove ace king on us on this flop, but again, it's unlikely. So not a great flop, but I'm certainly still going broke. Just because, like, who knows what he might have. Obviously, we're hoping for queens. I don't think it's necessary to bet that big. I think you can bet. I don't think our bet size makes a huge difference, but we're basically screaming that we have kings or aces in this situation. If the villain ended up calling queens and then now shoving queens on this flop, I don't think he played it all that well. So, wow. So he played it really badly by flatting pre-flop with queen 10 suited. I don't mind his play on the flop, but he's just going to find himself against just a world of hurt. So I would take a note on him that he flatted pre-flop with this kind of a hand to a 4-bet. Looks like we checked back on the table on the left. So again, we're just missing so much value with our passive flop play out of position. We end up going to the turn with strong hands, and we're just missing out value. So now we end up having a bet, and we're just, what are we really repping here? So that's one area that I would like to see El Sapo improve on. I think his biggest leak right now is calling pre-flop out of position and playing flops and turns passively. I think he should develop more check raising on this flop game and more leading into the flop game. So that said, looks like we are out of time. For cardrunners.com, this has been Verneer. I hope this video has been useful. Good luck at the tables, guys.